Kia's built a dedicated EV sedan that gets over 300 miles or 500 kilometers of range, starts at under $39,000 Canadian, and is built on a platform with genuine credentials, and then decided that America can't have it. That's the headline. Here's what they left out of the press release. They also made sure that its dynamic personality shows up late. "201 horsepower, 209 pounds of torque from one electric motor, and Kia has decided you should receive all of it slowly. From a stop, the first 2/3 of pedal travel provide a progressive ramp, the kind of delivery designed to make nervous EV buyers feel safe. Thankfully, in that last quarter of pedal travel is where the motor wakes up. Even in sport mode, the difference is marginal. There's slightly earlier response, but the whole system takes its time to wake up. And don't misunderstand, it's not a broken calibration. For most buyers, it's the correct one. But it is the opposite of sporting, and Kia made that choice deliberately. And this is a front-wheel drive single-motor setup, and on this platform, it seems less of an engineering necessity than a management decision. On a platform like this, the motor can go anywhere. Here, they put it up front and spent the rest of the dynamic calibration budget making sure you wouldn't ask follow-up questions. That's one way to solve torque steer. Another would be not starting there. And yes, there is some torque steer from time to time. Yes, it's minimal, but that's partly due to that throttle calibration making you work extremely hard to get maximum torque down to the ground. The front suspension geometry deserves some credit, but the software deserves more. There are 3 levels to regenerative braking, plus the I-pedal, and this system is properly sorted. The transitions are clean, the brake blending is nearly seamless, and this system feels like it was calibrated by someone who actually drives in traffic. On a car this cautious on throttle, regenerative braking is where it gives back the driver some sense of control. Subscribers get notified when new episodes drop on this channel. Non-subscribers hope the algorithm will show it to them eventually, and if you want to control when you see our videos on YouTube, well, that's what the subscribe button does. This segment is sponsored by Go Clean. Full disclosure, moving on. This is their waterless car wash. Canadian, eco-friendly, and no water required. I keep it in my kit because press cars don't stay clean and I hate wasting time on avoidable problems. A couple of minutes and the car is ready. It also smells fantastic, which was not something I was expecting in a car wash product, but here we are. That's Video Clean. Use code MAX15 for 15% off. Steering's strong on center, completely stable at highway speeds, and entirely unwilling to tell you much more than that. Off-center feels artificial, and then when you're loaded in the corner, you're reading body motion more than steering feel. This hardware should communicate more than that. The chassis isn't dead, but it has been instructed not to comment. The suspension is softly sprung, softly damped, and deliberately so. In a corner under load, there's significant body movement, but the chassis takes advantage of its very low center of gravity and stays planted. But the roll itself is pronounced enough that you feel it before any lateral information arrives through the steering or even the chassis. Over bumps, however, the trade-off pays. This ride is exceptionally comfortable. This suspension soaks up those road imperfections with a composure that EVs at this price point can't match. There's occasional secondary movement over larger bumps, a brief unsettled moment after that initial hit, but the primary ride is impressive enough to justify these soft suspension settings, provided you accepted the terms. Braking is the one dynamic system on this car that feels fully grown up. Initial pedal application is soft, but then once you get into the pedal, it is strong, and you've got all the confidence in the world in this brake pedal. In a car this cautious everywhere else, the brakes are unusually honest. During my testing, I have to say ABS intervention is somewhere in the middle, but we have a caveat on that. One, we are dealing with a cold, dusty surface, and we are on some winter tires, but once we're into full ABS, this EV4 stops confidently, tracks straight, and you know exactly what's going on at the brake pedal and at those contact patches, because the brake pedal feel is exceptional. The brake pedal is confidence-inspiring in ways that the throttle and the steering aren't. This EV4 sits lower than the EV6 on the same platform, and that should be a handling advantage. Instead, Kia cashed it in for ride quality, and I think that tells you everything about who Kia thinks their intended buyer is. Highway stability is impeccable. This tracks straight, holds a lane, and asks nothing of you at highway speeds. If your definition of driving is long distances on the freeway, this is a flawless car. If you want to support the channel beyond just watching, well, the merch store is open, and your support there means more time for us to produce episodes like this, less time worrying about manufacturer blacklists. No pressure, just an option. This long, fast back roof line suggests a low seating position, but that's not quite going on here. I think it's the battery in the floor that results in this feeling that you're seated a little high off the floor, and to be fair, I would say that this small amount of headroom is all the evidence we need. And I think the seating position's just more noticeable here simply because that roof line suggests otherwise. This seat is exceptionally supportive, lots of adjustment here, lots of adjustment in the steering column, and I've got a fantastic interface to this EV4. This flat bottom and flat topped steering wheel seems to come from the Nissan Leaf school of design. It doesn't really affect function, but it does affect the sense that someone in the design studio was optimizing for Instagram instead of perfect form. I'm seated comfortably and effectively exactly where I need to be to have a great relationship to the steering wheel and to the pedals, and I'm of average racer height, and it's even a stretch for me to get to that far end of the infotainment screen. It does seem that Kia prioritized the size of the screen first over ergonomics, but to be fair, they're not the only manufacturer guilty of putting big screens on their dashboards. Speaking of screens, there's 30 inches of it here. The instrument cluster is here, and it's clear, legible in all kinds of lighting conditions. Then on the far right, we have the infotainment screen. That's cool. In the middle, splitting those two, is much of the climate controls. With these climate controls wedged in between the other two screens, there's a bit of a problem. Those controls are obscured by the upper right portion of the steering wheel. What I don't get is that Kia had enough display space here to open up a regional office, but they chose to put the climate controls there. Good thing is the passenger gets a clear view, the driver gets a puzzle. Touch a lot of the surfaces around the cabin, and yes, you'll find plastics, but when you look at them, it works. Kia's figured out that at this price point, design discipline matters much more than soft touch marketing. The interior design is restrained, the look and feel of the faux leather is convincing, and mercifully, there's the complete absence of piano black and shiny chrome surfaces. Storage is good and clever all around the cabin. The flat floor means that real adults can be comfortable in that second row. In this front row, it is relatively open and airy, but you do feel that certainly if you're taller than about 6'1" or 6'2", that headroom is going to be a bit of an issue. In that second row, there's plenty of leg room. I can fit comfortably behind myself when I'm in the seating position. Lots of room there. And then in the trunk, well, that's a little bit of a different story. The thing is, this EV4 is styled like a fastback, but then packaged like a sedan. You get the rear profile of a liftback, and then when you open it, you find you've got a trunk lid. Thankfully, the cargo volume is there, but the aperture compared to a liftback isn't. Forward visibility is excellent. Zero complaints there. Rearward visibility is another question. Large outboard mirrors, love those. Yes, there's a backup camera for parking situations, but when when you're driving and look through the rear view mirror, that fastback roofline has compromised your rearward view by looking through a very short rear window. This column shifter is one of the best interior design decisions by far. It works by feel and it frees up space. And from a driver's perspective, I love it because it avoids the increasingly popular industry belief that shifting into a gear requires some sort of visual confirmation. The like button tells YouTube to share this episode with other people like you interested in an episode like this, and if this video gave you more information than a brochure or a press release, that's the entire ask. That's what the EV4 told me after a week. Here's what owners are saying, and with the EV4 being this new, data is thin, but it's also very specific. The biggest surprise is charging. The EV4 runs on 400-volt architecture, on paper a step behind the 800-volt EV6 and EV9. Every year, a Norwegian outfit runs a fleet of EVs through extreme winter charging tests at minus 31 Celsius. That's minus 24 Fahrenheit. This EV4 was one of only 2 cars in the entire field to actually hit its advertised peak charge rate, and it ran 10 to 80% in 33 minutes. It doesn't spike and crash like an 800-volt system. It holds flat, delivers more total energy over the session, and it turns out the spec sheet disadvantage is a real-world advantage. Here's what owners are saying about the driver assistance systems. Some owners say the driver attention monitor triggers a warning when you check your mirrors to pass. Lane Keep Assist re-enables itself every time you activate cruise control. Some say they eventually surrendered to the beeps because finding the settings to disable them requires a menu dive you don't want to attempt at highway speeds. For what it's worth, I didn't experience any of those woes. Here is where ownership logic gets clearer than marketing. The GT line gets the look, the wind long range gets the wheels, the ride, the range, and arguably the version of this car the platform actually wanted to be. And it seems the owner forums arrived at this conclusion before the brochure did. If you own one of these or have some quality seat time behind the wheel of one of these, let me know in the comments what I got right and what I got wrong, because real-world owner experiences are much more valuable than anything I can learn on a week-long press loan, and I always read those comments. Hyundai's IONIQ 5N and IONIQ 6N proved that this platform has some serious headroom, and this EV4 shares the same core fundamentals. Rigid floor, low center of gravity, multi-link rear. What it doesn't share is any obvious desire to use those advantages for anything beyond comfort. The N cars prove the ceiling. The EV4 shows how high the floor is and parks on it. Kia's built a dedicated EV sedan with real structural credibility, honest range, and pricing that undercuts the Model 3, at least here in Canada, then tuned it to keep the platform's talent in the background. If you want a quiet, comfortable, well-built electric sedan, the EV4 GT-Line works, and it starts at under $39,000 in Canada. A comparably equipped Model 3 costs more, charges slower on most public infrastructure, and has the interior ambiance of a startup that ran at a design budget after the screen. The value proposition is real. My American friends, you get the EV6, the EV9, and eventually the EV5. What you don't get is the Kia that's sized, priced, and packaged to walk into a Tesla store and have a genuine conversation. That's the Kia EV4. Subscribe if you want to see more episodes like this. Don't if you don't. Comments are open if you disagree, and if you want to support the channel, the merch store is open. See you on the next one.